I suppose there's no beating around the bush. Captain America Brave New World isn't good. In fact, it's bad, like very bad. A legitimate contender for the worst thing Marvel has ever produced levels of bad. No, it's not as viscerally embarrassing as Thor, Love and Thunder, as bland as Captain Marvel or, the Marvels, as limp as the Eternals, or as disposable as most of the studio's television output. But it may very well be the MCU's most soulless offering to date. The cinematic equivalent of a display home, a bland, generic construct that, from a distance, resembles a real building, but upon closer inspection, reveals itself to be little more than a flimsy facade containing nothing of real value. A hollow shell crudely erected with low-quality materials for no other purpose than to sell you the promise of something more authentic. I was pretty hard on Falcon and the Winter Soldier when that came out. In fact, it's probably fair to say that I loathed it. But had I known how dire this new era of Captain America was about to get, I probably would have kept my damn mouth shut and appreciated it for what it was, because for as insidious as I found the show's efforts to co-opt the struggles of oppressed groups while simultaneously demonizing any method of liberation outside of the purview of enlightened centrism, at least it constituted an actual point of view. There was substance there, substance that teetered between tediously condescending and off-puttingly reactionary, no doubt about it, but substance nonetheless. Brave New World, however, lacks even that. There isn't any messy or objectionable messaging because there isn't a discernible point of view of any kind. Hell, it barely even functions as blatant military propaganda the way the likes of Captain Marvel or Falcon and the Winter Soldier did. It truly is that empty. A cinematic oxymoron, a political thriller bereft of any coherent political ideas. And the most frustrating part about all of this is that it isn't hard to figure out why this is the case. For years now, certain bad faith actors online have attempted to tie the MCU's rapid decline in quality to its gradual efforts to diversify both in front of and behind the camera. Marvel's waning prestige couldn't possibly be due to the lack of vision post-Endgame, coupled with a stubborn over-reliance on safe and pliable in-house filmmakers. No. It's because Marvel got too political, prioritizing projects that push an agenda at the expense of good storytelling. And evidently, this is a narrative Marvel is all too willing to play along with. And it's just a complete lie. It's not an actual narrative. If people think that Captain America 4 is too political, good God. Rather than offering a mea culpa and course correcting because of all the bad and rushed decisions the studio made post-Endgame, they've seemingly accepted that the problem with their more recent output was indeed an overemphasis on politics, a laughable proposition when you consider just how inoffensive even the most politically engaged MCU films tend to be. And as a sign of good faith, they've changed their wicked ways. They've delivered unto us the long-awaited fourth entry in the Captain America franchise, a movie that's had any and all potential political messaging scrubbed away so as to not offend anyone who might find that kind of content objectionable. And when I say scrubbed away, I mean scrubbed. This movie was very obviously cut to shreds and reworked multiple times, so much so that the only morsel of entertainment value left in it might be trying to identify which scenes are reshoots or which lines are ADR. Although, on second thought, that actually might not be all that stimulating considering how painfully obvious the seams are. Not only is this a cowardly way to make art, essentially robbing the filmmakers of their voice and reducing them to nothing more than assembly line technicians, but more specifically, it is a disastrous way to make a political thriller. I can't believe this even needs to be said, but you can't make a political thriller without engaging in politics. I mean, it's right there in the name. Political thriller. Having something to say about politics is kind of the whole fucking thing. You simply can't write a political thriller that skirts around making a political statement. It's a defining part of the genre, and yet, that's exactly what seems to have happened with Brave New World. At any given moment, you can feel the suits tinkering behind the scenes to nip in the bud any idea that might be seen as being too political. Whenever a scene teeters on the edge of saying something interesting or provocative, it's swiftly nullified by a completely contradictory development in subsequent scenes. And look, I get there's a contingent of people out there who couldn't give less of a fuck whether or not these movies have something to say about the world we live in. For some of you, it really just boils down to whether you enjoyed the ride. And that's fine, while I may find that view of art's a bit reductive, I can't really do anything to stop people from feeling that way. I really am glad if you enjoyed Captain America: Brave New World. So all I'll say is this. This lack of perspective impacts way more than just the film's ability to effectively function as a political thriller. It's upstream of everything. A plot without something to say is directionless, and characters without a point of view are doomed to remain one-dimensional. The simple fact is, you can't make a political thriller devoid of political commentary for the same reason you can't live in a display home. Everything inside is non-functional. And if you don't want the same to happen to your body, since, super serum doesn't exist, you're going to want to make sure you're getting the best possible sleep you can, and it's all possible with today's sponsor, Dream. Dream is a nighttime blend of hot cocoa that's packed with all natural ingredients, including melatonin, magnesium, and reishi mushrooms to support all 4 stages of sleep, as well as mental clarity, mood, and stress levels. Good sleep regulates your body's clock to boost your energy, and within 17.5 million nights of improved sleep and counting, that's the kind of sleep that a cup of Dream each night compliments. Between late nights working on FilmSpeak videos and attending advanced screenings and award ceremonies like Critics' Choice, I am always on an erratic sleep schedule. I have the worst sleep schedule, but that's why Dream takes one of my favorite treats, hot beverages, and hot chocolate's great too, and provides me with an easier, faster, more consistent sleep while letting me indulge in something delicious in only 15 calories. So as we head into colder nights and longer evenings this winter, it's the perfect time to create a cozy, calming nighttime routine with Dream. Just click the link in the description, use code FilmSpeak at checkout, and get up to 35% off Dream by Beam. Thank you so much to Dream for sponsoring this video. Okay, so we've established why it's bad to make a political thriller about nothing, but you came here for specifics, right? Well, you came here to hear me talk about Captain America 4, to be more specifically. Well, perhaps the best place to start is with the film's subtitle. That might sound a tad pedantic, but I think it's actually the perfect encapsulation of what went wrong with this film. Because, and I swear, I'm asking this in good faith, why the hell was the subtitle Brave New World? At cursory glance, it's a title packed with meaning, a direct allusion to the title of Aldous Huxley's seminal dystopian novel, one of the most influential deconstructions of authoritarianism in the Western canon, which itself derived its title from one of the most recognizable lines in William Shakespeare's The Tempest. I mean, come on, right? Titles don't get more significant than that. In Shakespeare's play, the line is intended to convey the speaker's naivete. Miranda, who has lived her entire life in isolation, is meeting outsiders for the first time in her life and exalting them without fully understanding the darker facets of their nature. The line is dripping with irony, and that irony directly informs Huxley's use of it. Not only does John, one of the principal characters in Brave New World, explicitly mirror Miranda, he too is an outsider making contact with people that are more nefarious than he initially realizes. But the line more broadly reflects the book's central theme. Brave New World is a story about a totalitarian society's superficial benevolence belying its malevolence. The cruel irony of Miranda's naivete made manifest on a societal scale. In making such an overt reference to this extraordinarily meaningful title, you'd think Captain America: Brave New World would, at the very least, feign to engage with similar ideas. But, unfortunately, you'd be mistaken. There's absolutely no reason for this film to be called Brave New World beyond the most literal meaning of the words. There has been a paradigm shift in the MCU, and this new status quo represents a quote-unquote new world for the characters to venture into. Bravely, I suppose. It's little more than an aesthetic exercise, a cynical attempt to gesture at politics without engaging in them, invoking a recognizable phrase broadly associated with political themes to give the audience the impression that the film is about things, but it's little more than a facade, genre cosplay, an empty signifier designed to conjure the feeling of political intrigue while remaining safely insulated from any actual meaning. And I get it, right? You guys are like, what the fuck, man? Like, why are you going on and on about this? Like, we don't care. Why are you doing this? Why am I so fixated on this title? Well, because this is what the entire film is like. Brave New World is a political thriller that wants to appear vaguely political, but is terrified of actually being political. So much so that the filmmakers even changed its subtitle to avoid making a statement. Oh yeah, that's right. In case you didn't know, Brave New World wasn't even the film's original title. That would be New World Order, a title that, if I'm being honest, actually reflects the story a whole lot better given the fact it's ostensibly about a drastic shift in geopolitical power. The only problem was the term is inextricably linked to fringe conspiracy theories about globalism and the deep state. So, to avoid any potential controversy, it was switched out. We can only speculate how they landed on Brave New World of all titles as a replacement. If I had to guess, it was probably because it has most of the same words in it, but it's easier to separate from its original meaning. But, whatever the reason was, it sure as shit wasn't because it was more relevant to the film's plot or themes. No element of the film suffers more from this surface-level approach to politics than Sam Wilson himself. After Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you might have expected the next project to feature Sam in a leading role to zero in on his complicated relationship with the mantle he now holds. Over the course of that series, we saw Sam grappling with both the burden of living up to Steve Rogers' legacy and the fact that some people were resistant to the idea of a black Captain America. Like I said earlier, I don't think that show did a particularly good job exploring either of these ideas and ultimately did them a disservice by weaving them through a spineless appeal to moderation in the face of bigotry. But my feelings aside, it's undoubtedly what that show was about, so it stands to reason that Sam's next outing as Cap would pick up where the series left off, with Sam stepping into the role in earnest and attempting to navigate the position while remaining true to his principles. However, Brave New World can't even do that. Presumably because the idea of touching on themes of race more directly petrified the studio. The result is a lead character that feels totally adrift in his own film. Sam has almost nothing to do for the majority of the runtime. Sure, he's there driving the plot, but the fact that it's him and not some other hero feels entirely incidental. We're rarely given a reason as to why this had to be Sam's story. Nothing about who he is as a character tethers him to the events of the narrative. Well, almost nothing. The one legitimate connection Sam has to the story is his relationship with Isaiah Bradley, who returns from Falcon in the Winter Soldier and represents a rare, bright spot in the film. It's through Isaiah that we learn that Sam feels compelled to play ball with the newly elected President Thaddeus Ross. Don't worry, we'll get to him. Because Sam feels like not only an ambassador for his country, but for his community, he feels it's his obligation to leverage his position as Captain America to work with Ross and ensure the matters that are important to him and his community are addressed. This is a legitimately solid piece of characterization and one that builds off of who Sam was in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, reflecting the way in which members of minority communities who reach positions of power often feel an obligation to do right by the community, even if it means compromising one's own moral and ethical boundaries. A very real phenomenon that dovetails beautifully off of Sam's previous adventure. Moreover, when Isaiah is used as a weapon to get at Ross, Sam feels equally obligated to exonerate his friend, in part because he feels as though it's his fault that Isaiah was even at the White House to begin with. Owing to his own history with the US government, Isaiah didn't particularly want to go, but Sam insisted, because he feels the need to use his status to uplift his community and right historic injustices against Black Americans. He wanted to share a bit of glory with the man who helped lift him up into the position in the first place, the man whose suffering paved the way for a public-facing Black Captain America. but in doing so, he put Isaiah in danger. In bringing him to the White House, Sam basically played a hand in Isaiah suffering the same trauma that he spent a lifetime trying to escape, the trauma of being used. And just as resonant is Isaiah's refusal of Sam's help. Where Sam sees his quest to redeem Isaiah as one of restorative justice, Isaiah sees it as a risk not worth taking. Although he's skeptical of Sam's willingness to cooperate with the government given the innumerable ways in which it has used black bodies throughout history, Isaiah still sees his ascension to the title of Captain America as progress. Progress that could very well be lost should Sam's reputation become inseparable from his own. He doesn't want Sam to help because doing so could do irreparable damage to the community they've both struggled to serve. Sam and Isaiah's conversation in the prison is probably the best scene in the movie because it feels honest and speaks to a real dynamic. Young minorities feeling compelled to use progress to make things right for the elders who made that progress possible, and older minorities resigning themselves to less than the justice they deserve for fear that this impulse could undermine the fragile progress they won for their descendants. Despite getting off to a rocky start with an opening action scene that I can only describe as atrocious, this moment made me think the film might actually end up being half decent. For a split second, there was a glimmer of hope, a political idea at the heart of this political thriller. Imagine that! But, no sooner than it's introduced, the idea subsides into the background. Yes, saving Isaiah remains Sam's stated goal throughout the film, but the internal conflict to which it speaks is barely mentioned again, only rearing its head again in the final 5 minutes of the following action. Outside these handful of moments, Sam feels like he's just there because the film needs a hero to drive the story. His role is so perfunctory that it's a genuine shock when the film once again tries to inject his story with a little more substance at the end of the second act. During the big naval battle at Celestial Island, Joaquin Torres, Sam's best friend, his new best friend, and the new Falcon, is mortally wounded, causing Sam to question his worthiness to be Captain America. While watching over Joaquin's operation, Sam's visited by his other best friend, Congressman Bucky Barnes. Oh yeah, I guess he's a congressman now because, why the fuck not? This universe is so fucking cooked, man. And for the record, I don't hate the idea that Bucky is a congressman. I think there's interesting things you can do with that I hope they explore in Thunderbolts and such, but it's just so random. It feels like this movie, and specifically scenes like this, are sequels to films that already exist. Anyways. Representative Barnes shows up and Sam opines his regret in not taking the super soldier serum. Not only is this not something Sam has ever expressed prior to this moment, nor has the super soldier serum even been relevant to the story of this film in any way, shape, or form until now, but this is quite literally what Falcon and the Winter Soldier was all about. We've done this story already, and it makes absolutely no sense to relitigate it here other than because the filmmakers needed Sam to have a dark night of the soul and communicate to the audience that this is indeed the end of the second act in a 3-act story. I cannot stress enough, there is no actual indication that Sam is feeling this way prior to this point, aside from a little joke he makes after fighting the leader's henchmen. And much like the intergenerational conflict between Sam and Isaiah, Bucky's pep talk isn't completely devoid of promise. The idea that Steve Rogers was an idealized version of America for people to believe, while Sam embodies an America that people can aspire to, is an interesting concept that builds on the self-doubt Sam wrestled with in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It's just not at all what this movie has been about until this point, and it never comes up again thereafter. Outside of this brief conversation, we never see Sam struggling to define himself in the shadow of his predecessor. Even the overexposed, "You're not Steve Rogers. You're not Steve Rogers" line from the trailer plays out completely different in context and doesn't contribute to a crisis of identity the way it appeared to in the promotional material. Bucky can say Sam's lack of powers make him aspirational all he wants, but every other aspect of the movie wants us to see him as anything but that. The cynical side of my brain suspects the line about taking the super soldier serum was only thrown in to preempt angry nerds who won't be able to accept that an average man can go toe-to-toe with the Red Hulk. Just another example of Marvel attempting to hang a lantern on anticipated criticism. But ironically, their other attempt to preempt the ire of pedantic nerds, getting Sam out like a one-man army, cancels out this moment of self-doubt and exposes it for the empty gesture it always was. Another aspect of Sam's character that suffers from the film's unwillingness to say anything is Sam's conflict with the US government. Like I said before, Sam's expressed desire to work within the system is primarily driven by a sense of responsibility. He's been afforded an unparalleled platform and he wants to use it to champion his community. Great. But we also never get to see this actually play out before the plot kicks into gear. We're simply told this is the case, which kind of speaks to a broader issue with the film, which is that 90% of it is exposition. I know it's popular to lambaste these films as concerning nothing more than plot and lore, but that has never been more apparent than in Brave New World. I kid you not, the only things people ever talk about in this movie are what is going on in the plot, to the point where you have characters explicitly stating what is happening on screen, presumably in case some members of the audience are too busy looking at their second screens to notice, and their respective backstories conventionally recapped in full in case the audience doesn't remember, which I guess is actually kind of understandable considering this film is a direct sequel to a TV show most of the audience didn't watch in a movie from 17 years ago that no one remembers, but I digress. We're only ever told there's tension between Sam and President Ross. They have no solitary scene together before Isaiah is brainwashed and makes an attempt on Ross's life, prompting Sam to go rogue, and even that is framed as being more about his personal loyalties than it is about an ideological split between him and the administration. Ironically, this is exactly the same problem I have with Captain America Civil War, which is all too eager to abandon its ideological debate in favor of an infinitely more anodyne interpersonal drama, which would be fine if these films didn't bill themselves as, political thrillers. But at least with Steve, we had 2 previous solo films and 2 separate Avengers outings to color in his complicated relationship with the government before it became the Steve and Bucky show. Here, I don't really know how I'm supposed to view Sam's relationship with the government beyond what I'm told. Yes, Sam clashed with the feds in Falcon and the Winter Soldier over the whole "we're replacing you as Captain America" thing, but one of the few aspects of this film that is made explicitly clear is that Ross's administration is a different beast altogether, and that Sam's cooperation with Ross is uniquely questionable. Alright, fair enough, but you have to demonstrate how. I get Ross locked Sam up in the raft at the end of Civil War, but how does that tension manifest in their current relationship now? When Sam meets Ross in the Oval Office following his successful mission in Mexico, we get a few lines about their troubled history, setting the stage for a personal conflict between the two men, one that's further complicated by Ross's proposition to restart the Avengers, an idea that only makes Sam even more uneasy about their alliance. The problem is, none of this ever comes up again. We never get a chance to see how these two men navigate this fraught interpersonal relationship because the plot kicks into gear moments later and they basically don't share any scenes until the very end, at which point all of their interactions revolve around issues specific to the plot. A plot that is more or less unrelated to their pre-existing friction. For most of the film, Ross could just be any other generic president butting heads with the hero. Throw President Ritson or Ellis in there, and you'd get more or less the exact same dynamic between them. It doesn't feel specific, and that lack of specificity makes the fact that Sam goes rogue a few scenes later feel hollow. We can't really appreciate the breakdown of their fragile alliance if we don't understand the parameters of said alliance beforehand. And then there's the fact that the movie can't even really decide how rogue to make Sam. Like, at first, he decides he's gonna have to work behind Ross's back to exonerate Isaiah because it's very clear Ross isn't willing to consider the fact he wasn't in control when he tried to shoot him. But then, when Sam and Joaquin meet Samuel Stearns and realize that Ross knew from the start that Isaiah wasn't responsible, but was willing to throw the book at this to keep his secret alliance with Stearns under wraps, Sam's next move after liaising with his Spec Ops pals, because apparently the president hasn't told anyone but his personal security detail that Sam is a fugitive, is to try and reason with Ross? Huh? I get that they want to make compassion a core part of Sam's Captain America. He was a former VA counselor, so it tracks that he would be compelled to, and particularly adept at, de-escalating volatile situations and helping people open up about their trauma. It's actually one of the few well-established tenets of his personality. But he just found out that Ross is knowingly letting his friend, not just a mentor, but a fellow serviceman, someone who has suffered directly at the hands of the US government for most of his adult life, take the fall for a crime he didn't commit so that he can keep his hands clean. Where's the rage? Where's any emotion, any reaction at all? Sam took up this mission to exonerate Isaiah without missing a beat because he felt guilty for putting him in that position in the first place. And so the revelation that Ross is willingly letting it happen should be confronting. It should reorient his entire cause. Yet, it's just treated like another piece of information. Sam just goes to appeal to Ross's better nature because the plot needs him to. You've already made a point of the fact that Sam is willing to play ball with Ross to advance his own personal cause, to lift up his community. So, in a way, I get the impulse to have Sam stay the course and double down on this tactic, reason with Ross because he knows blowing up on him will only worsen his position and in turn hurts Isaiah. But you actually need the characters to address this, even if it's subtle. There needs to be a moment where we can tell he is committed to this course of action. Otherwise, it's just sloppy character writing. The filmmakers have thrown Sam into a situation that tests his resolve and then refuse to have him actually face the test, making his apparent triumph over it, his willingness to still work with Ross despite everything, feel like an oversight. And it probably was, because those scenes were probably part of different drafts and therefore never designed to coexist. But regardless of how it happened, the result is a Captain America who doesn't seem to know what he believes or why he acts, and who blindly adheres to the path of least resistance and seems willing to give monsters endless second chances without so much as a thought, a trait that feels woefully out of step with the moments we live in. Which brings us, at last, to President Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, the Red Hulk himself. It's actually pretty funny to think back on just how much of this film's marketing was dedicated to Red Hulk, because the movie itself treats it as this shocking payoff to a series of interconnected mysteries. What's Ross hiding? Why is he holding Samuel Stearns at a black site? What are those pills he keeps taking? Mysteries that, while probably still fairly obvious to devout comic book nerds, could have made for genuine points of intrigue for a regular theater goer, were it not for the fact that literally every poster, trailer, TV spot, and interview leading up to the release made it explicitly clear that Brave New World was going to culminate in Ross becoming the Red Hulk. This is actually a pervasive problem with the film's approach to its mysteries in general. At just about every turn, the audience is way ahead of the characters on screen. This isn't necessarily a problem on its face. In fact, it's the essence of Hitchcockian suspense, but it has to be done with intention. It should build anticipation, not deflate it. While the audience isn't out ahead of the characters in this instance, the information is doled out way too soon, to way too many characters. I get that Sam needs a thread to pull on to motivate his crusade to prove Isaiah's innocence, but did everyone in the cast need to figure it out so quickly as well? If you're making a political thriller and your two central conspiracies are awkwardly revealed within the first hour, you're probably doing something terribly wrong. This is a genre that lives and dies by its ability to build intrigue, and Brave New World has neither the patience nor a deft enough hand to know when to reveal information and when to withhold it. And weirdly enough, this kinda goes both ways, because for as prematurely as the film blows its load with regards to its two central mysteries, it's shockingly cagey when it comes to other details. Like, what exactly is this treaty Ross is so passionate about? I get it's about world powers agreeing to cooperate with regards to the extraction of adamantium on Celestial Island, but how is that supposed to work? And why did Ross make this of all things his key diplomatic goal? What is his angle here? And what is the Serpent Society, for fuck's sake? Like, they just show up and I guess hate Captain America. Why do they hate Captain America? I wouldn't be bothered by so many of these things if the film had something else for me to latch onto, but it pretty much doesn't. And given the script's eagerness to spill the beans on just about everything else, it's eyebrow-raising that these are the elements it decides to be coy about. But, back to Ross. It's very clear what the filmmaker's intentions were for the character. If Steve embodies an idealized America and Sam embodies a more attainable aspiration for America, then Ross is the inverse of these things. He's the complicated reality of America, a country that wants to believe it's the good guy, but one that has compromised itself to such a degree that it's unclear whether it can ever again claim the moral high ground. He's the America of Vietnam, Iraq, South American regime change, Jim Crow, slavery, ethnic cleansing, both at home and abroad. You get the idea. By pitting these two visions of America against one another, the film begs the question, can America truly change? Or at least that feels like the question the film wants to ask, because in execution, this message is far more opaque. The film doesn't just want to explore this question through the struggle between Sam and Ross, it also wants to make Ross's entire arc in the film explicitly about it. In the very first scene, we learn that Ross has become estranged from his daughter, Betty, thanks to his fanatical pursuit of Bruce Banner during and after the events of The Incredible Hulk. Now, as an older man, he has mellowed quite a bit and wants to make amends for his past actions. He wants to prove he can and has changed. But this gets complicated once we learn that Ross has kept Samuel Stearns as a political prisoner so that he can continue to develop a drug to treat his degenerative heart condition. This heinous crime against humanity, coupled with his willingness to basically throw Isaiah under the bus to save face, throws into question whether he has truly changed. This culminates in Ross transforming into the Red Hulk, the physical manifestation of his sins, and going on a rampage, hurting those around him and threatening to tear the country apart, a threat made explicit by Ross's destruction of the symbols of American democracy, such as the White House and the Washington Monument. That's all pretty decent stuff, particularly given the current political climate, in which it's not hard to imagine a temperamental president laying waste to the American experiment in a desperate attempt to protect himself from the consequences of his actions. However, as interesting as all this is, it kind of falls flat on its face when combined with his conflict with Sam. Because making Ross's journey about whether he can be redeemed fundamentally shifts Sam's role in the story. Rather than pitting the aspirational America against the reality of America to see which will prevail, you're now asking whether the good of America can redeem the bad of America. Can Sam save Ross? It might sound like I'm splitting hairs here, but the distinction is significant. On one hand, you've got a clash of visions for the country, two opposite and incompatible viewpoints duking it out. On the other, you've got a question of atonement. Can America's sins be forgiven? And while that also has the potential to be interesting when narrowed to the specific actions of a political lead, it starts to wander into really ugly waters. The movie starts to look an awful like it's making the case for forgiving our leaders their transgressions, no matter how heinous. Or, as Ross's secretary advisor Ruth Batsaroff would put it, none of us have to be defined by our past. A particularly galling line given the character's origin, and that's pretty much how the film's entire approach to Ross feels, just a series of feckless pleas for unity. If the president reveals himself to be a monster and begins destroying the very fabric of our republic, you shouldn't fight him. No, you should be the bigger man and use your words, because the only thing worse than being a threat to the nation is sinking to their level. As if the filmmakers distilled Michelle Obama's
"when they go low, we go high"
into a single patronizing screenplay. To the film's credit, it's in moments like this that the film truly feels like a sequel to Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because it was this exact brand of just mealy-mouthed nothingness that made that show borderline unwatchable. And look, I can always foresee the comment asking, well, hey, what's wrong with that? But, you're missing the point. If your political thriller is about the clash of two different sides of America and it ends with the guy who embodies the promise of America having to swallow his pride and forgive the man who embodies all of America's worst impulses both at home and abroad in order to prevent that character from doing even more damage, congratulations, you've just made a movie about placating evil. One in which a sense of civility and normalcy is more important than actual justice. Steve Rogers would never. And look, I'm not going to sit here and appreciate what they were trying to do with Ross and Betty. I do genuinely think bringing this element into the story does a lot to give that character some pathos, while also playing to Harrison Ford's strengths as a performer. And let me be clear, Ford is on top form here, simultaneously playing into and against type and adding some legitimate dimension to a character who, despite his long tenure in the MCU, doesn't really have much going on. But making it the crux of his redemption is laughable. The equivalent of saying Hitler had dogs to humanize the man. And no, I'm not saying Ross is Hitler, no, not at all. But the fact that he has a daughter whose affection he wants to win back does not in any way make up for his many transgressions, nor does it prove that his commitment to fundamentally changing who he is sincere and all-encompassing. Ross can earnestly want to prove he's a better man and father, but the depth of that desire doesn't make it so, and his actions throughout the film actively refute this notion. Ross tortured and blackmailed a prisoner so that he could keep his heart working long enough to prove to his daughter that he's a good man. In any other film, the sheer irony of this contradiction would be the point, but in Brave New World, it's something we're told to look past, forgive even. Let he who hasn't violated the Geneva Convention to win back the approval of our daughter cast the first stone. Much like everything else in this film concerning Ross, this bullshit is extra hard to swallow, given the state of the world we're in. A world in which we're being asked to forgive a certain president for the sake of national unity and consider the humanity of the oligarch that has captured our democracy because he has a kid and brings him to all of his meetings. So cute, right? So speaking of Elon, we should probably also talk about Samuel Stearns, the leader, who bafflingly calls himself the hero at one point. Like just about everything else in this film, Stearns is a character with a lot of potential. I mean, the idea that the president would strike a deal with a shadowy figure in order to win the presidency, only for that person to then laud that fact over them once in office and attempt to seize control, feels incredibly relevant right now. It also calls to mind the likes of Steve Bannon or the aforementioned Musk. But somehow, Brave New World manages to whiff this easy layup too. Instead, the leader is this disgruntled employee who Ross experiments on and keeps captive. There's a mutual agreement that Ross will allow him to continue his research so long as he remains a captive. And then, once he reaches the presidency, he'll let him go free. But when he doesn't, Stearns just gets mad and vindictive. His actual plan is one of revenge, exposing Ross for the monster he really is by turning him into a literal monster. That's all well and good, but it doesn't really make him the bad guy, right? Like, he's actually quite justified in his hatred of Ross. And while his methods are extreme, they're no more extreme than what Ross did to him. And yet, we're just supposed to accept that the leader is the bad guy when he does it, while Ross is a misunderstood guy who did bad things and, he had honorable intentions and simply got in over his head, and he didn't know how to back out of it without compromising himself further. If Ross really is the monster he's been shown to be, then there's really no excuse for letting him off the hook in the end, especially if you're going to condemn Stearns for simply retaliating in an equally ruthless fashion. Yes, Ross literally becomes the manifestation of all of his rage, aggression, and ruthlessness when he becomes the Red Hulk. A transformation that is meant to impugn his repeated attempts to rebrand himself. And I do like the fact that this aspect of his personality didn't just come back in a single moment of weakness. It was present throughout the film as a simmering rage just under the surface, one that suddenly came to a boil at the end. But to have him just get talked down in the end, immediately resign from office, and voluntarily submit himself to a maximum security prison? Like, that's such an anticlimax and feels totally out of step with who we know this guy to be. Something that is only made more insulting by the fact that Stearns suddenly just decides to turn himself in before the third act fight for literally no reason. It's totally unmotivated, and just like Ross's rushed resolution, it feels like the writer is forcing the characters into a neat but unearned conclusion so that the story can just end. Yet, in a weird way, this abrupt and unsatisfying conclusion feels almost fitting for a character that would just goofily pop up in new locations out of nowhere whenever the story needed him. A character who decided that, in addition to getting his revenge against Ross, he was also going to pit Ross and Sam against one another in a clash of ideologies a la Baron Zemo, despite having zero reason to do so. So, in a sense, Stearns went out the way he lived, as a plot device. So that was therapeutic, right? It was cathartic. I feel better getting all that out, but, I don't know. If you couldn't tell by literally everything I had to say about this film, I really didn't want to dislike Captain America: Brave New World. I love Captain America as a character and the ways in which he can, engage with the politics around us, and specifically the US as a country and our morals and everything. And I think this is a film that had a lot of potential. Every element of the story contains the germ of an idea that could have made for an exciting and thought-provoking political thriller. And while I think they squandered that potential in just about every instance, delivering the most impotent conspiracy thriller imaginable in which no idea is permitted to be anything more than a premise, I maintain that making it a political thriller was a smart idea. Unlike the previous 3 Captain America movies, which teetered between espionage and war film, it's very clear that the team behind Brave New World wanted this to be an out-and-out political thriller, complete with a grand conspiracy involving the upper echelons of power and an emphasis on geopolitical tensions. Even the score goes full tilt in this direction, and funnily enough, winds up being the most unambiguously great thing about this film. I'm not even kidding, the score slaps. Big JFK meets House of Cards energy. But at the end of the day, a political thriller needs something to say, and Brave New World says nothing. It half says a lot, introducing ideas before leaving them to wither on the vine. And the unfortunate reality is it doesn't even work as a light Marvel romp either, while clearly pulling heavily from The Winter Soldier both in terms of plot and style and structure as well. The action is embarrassingly flaccid. The hand-to-hand combat is sluggish and awkwardly framed, while the gonzo CGI spectacle lacks weight and impact. The character drama that usually buoys these films is severely lacking, and the scope of the world is ill-defined. And I'm not just talking about the hilarious vague treaty or the farcical decision to cast Japan as the antagonistic nation vying for control of adamantium as to avoid any direct parallels to real-world conflicts over resources. No. The literal locations in which scenes take place often feel like a void, absent of texture or even people. These barren environments genuinely reminded me of a COVID production at times. The dialogue is some of the most shamelessly functional dialogue I think I've ever heard in a Marvel movie. Characters don't actually have conversations or interact like human beings. They spew exposition and punctuate it with an explicit expression of how that information makes them feel, lest we, the audience, miss any subtext while checking our emails or whatever the fuck Marvel thinks we're doing while watching this movie. Then again, maybe they were just being optimistic that we wouldn't be paying attention to the screen because the movie is also ugly as sin. When it's not plagued by reshoot-laden green screen inserts, jarring editing, and shoddy CGI that appears to have been slathered in the same bloom effect that was a hallmark of every PlayStation 3 game striving for photorealism in 2008, there's a made-for-TV quality to the lighting and shot composition that cheapens the overall experience. Admittedly, the aerial battle over Celestial Island was a highlight in spite of some garish effects. Julius Ona utilized the IMAX aspect ratio to great effect and staged a set piece with appropriate scale. But everything else, including the big showdown between Sam and Ross, is left feeling a tad underwhelming. Something purporting to be impressive, but never quite living up to the scale and scope that the filmmakers believe it has. An impression that isn't helped by the film's wild tonal shifts as the story erratically oscillates between semi-grounded conspiracy thriller and wacky science fiction monster mash. It's like a Joel Schumacher Batman movie, although at least Batman Forever looks good. So I guess what I meant to say is it's like Batman and Robin. Although, at least that film has a camp factor, so what was I saying again? Oh yeah, this movie blows ass, man. Maybe in another universe, Marvel actually had the balls to work out a deal with Universal and made it into the Incredible Hulk sequel it so desperately wanted to be. But we don't live in that world, and so we have to instead live with a half-baked relaunch of Sam Wilson's Captain America, a film that crams his character into a story he barely fits and then forgets to develop his character until the final minutes, shoehorning in a clumsy speech about the burden of carrying the weight of your community on your shoulders, an experience that Sam seems to suggest is totally foreign to his Latino American sidekick. Oof, it's a brave new world indeed.